Hey there everyone, and welcome back to more tabletop RPG horror story cringe with D&D Doge. In today's episode, we have a tale about a prospective player that doesn't realize RPGs involve math, a story about a crab going up against eating utensils, and much more. So, without further ado, let's get right into these stories. Dungeon Master forces player characters into the background so that her anime OCs can be the real main characters. By Reddit user Nature Comfortable 234. This story takes place a few years ago, so apologies if details are fuzzy. I just wanted to get it off my chest. I was part of a group of work friends turned friends that play D&D quite a bit. It's how we all met in the first place. We rotate whoever DMs, which usually results in short and sweet 1 to 3 session campaigns. The Dungeon Master who was up to give us our next session was a complete newbie, but no worries. Every great DM has to do it for the first time once, right? I'll admit, I was a little nervous, because this person was specifically the least proficient player in the group. I wouldn't usually notice this kind of thing, since I don't focus too much on battle optimizations either, especially in our narrative-heavy campaigns. But this was different. She had no idea how to cast spells, or use martial weapons, what spells she had access to at any given moment, constantly had to have someone pointing over her shoulder, pointing at what modifier to use for her weapons or skills, asking us what die she's supposed to roll for checks, etc. While learning the game, I wouldn't bat an eye at these kinds of questions, but we were 3 years into this group, and she had absolutely no idea how D&D worked. It really didn't help that her characters always seemed to just dissolve into murder hobo emo contrarians by the end of the campaign, most of the time actively impeding party progress with their antics. All of this was bad enough, but then she decided to run a homebrew. This is not uncommon at all in our group, but for the most newbie player turned DM, I was getting more and more concerned with the structural integrity of the upcoming campaign. Myself and others tried to gently suggest a pre-con campaign since she had said she was nervous to DM for the first time, but in the end, our concerns fell on deaf ears. Session 1 comes around. We all awake in a clearing in the woods with no memories of how we got there, and now we have to find our way home. We start off the game with 4 DM NPCs, a kind-hearted leader-type girl, a broody edgelord catboy, a quieter girl who is, surprise, jealous of the main girl, and a go-get-em shonen manga pro-tag guy who is in love with the main girl, which I thought was odd, but okay. Maybe there's harder fights ahead, and we'll need the backup. Not 10 minutes into the campaign, and all of the DM's efforts seem to be going towards role-playing an NPC love triangle with her OCs, while the actual player characters try to break into a deserted cabin and make progress towards going home. I remember one of the NPCs crying and being scared, while the other NPCs consoled her, and I had to actively resist pulling a face as the DM refused to move on until the player characters also consoled her. We eventually got into said cabin after my character broke in a window and wiggled through. This was followed by awkward silence as we all waited for the DM to start describing something. She looked confused that everyone was looking at her and not talking, so I had to start asking leading questions to get her to describe where the hell we were. Eventually, I simply got a, "You're in a hallway. Are there doors? Is there another part of the cabin that I can walk to? What condition is the cabin in? Is it lit? What do I see?" Eventually, we moved on, but it was like pulling teeth, with plenty of long awkward pauses as we waited for her to continue to describe what my character saw in his eyeballs. We eventually found a note with some weird phrase on it that all of us thought was a joke from the DM, but she was acting like it was really important, though it never came up again and had nothing to do with the twist, so I still don't know what that was about. The rest of the session is fine, with the exception of the myriad of pauses we had to take, where the NPCs have to have more angst and more drama between them. The DM occasionally having the one super kind-hearted girl character turn to the player characters and express how much she wishes she could get us home. The following sessions are a blur, not just because this happened so long ago, but because, again, nothing was really being described. I constantly was confused as to where we were, what was around us, and it took a lot of asking for the DM to give us any details, and she seemed to be completely unaware that this was something that we would need to know. Pepper in more NPC drama, and I just couldn't stay invested at all in this adventure. I tried to stay optimistic, but we quite literally are not the main characters of the story. Nothing we say or do matters in the progression of the campaign, and the DM would pout and sulk when we didn't interact with her NPCs enough. We also never encountered any puzzles, traps, or combat. I don't even necessarily need combat, but there wasn't any narrative story reason for me to be invested in either. It was just a whole lot of nothing. Each session was less of a role-playing adventure and more an imaginary puppet show of anime tropes, with the puppeteer pouting and making a scene when the audience wasn't completely enraptured. Then it comes time for the quote-unquote twist. It turns out we're in a different dimension, and this dimension has mirror versions of us. The player characters immediately start befriending their other selves, having a good chortle at the absurdity of it all. We were lovers of wackiness, what can I say? But that didn't matter in the slightest, apparently. We were supposed to be paying attention to the real main characters, the NPCs, having a melodramatic standoff with their other selves. It turns out, their version of the nice kind-hearted girl turned evil because she was actually jealous of her jealous friend. The other dimension's NPCs claimed that the girl that we were all traveling with was actually her evil counterpart. She was acting really shady during the whole encounter, so my character decided, great, I guess we'll kill her. Now, under normal circumstances, I would have never tried to pull something like this. I know it was kind of a dick move to make my player character actually try to kill her, but in my defense, she wasn't really giving us a lot of options, and it felt like this was where the narrative was going. I wanted this campaign to be over, since I'd endured session after session of the player characters being the background characters, while the DM just roleplayed her little OC fanfiction and forced us to watch. Two of the other player characters were also down to do it. We all kind of felt like this must be the final fight. That's when the DM starts shouting at us out of game and crying, saying that we can't do that and it's not supposed to go that way. I was taken aback. I immediately asked, well, what were we supposed to do? Because obviously what the players want was not important to her. It all culminated in the most limp, soggy, emotional resolution that nobody but her was invested in. We ended the game having fought no enemies, solved no problems, and honestly, I was just glad that it was as brief as it was. TLDR. First time DM doesn't know the rules, makes bland NPCs into main characters, and is surprised when no one's invested in their love triangle. So, this player played D&D games for 3 years with this group, and in all that time, none of the rules stuck? Why the hell would you let this player even consider running a game, let alone running a campaign with multiple sessions? I mean, yeah, what she did by making the player characters basically the audience for her OCs is a crap move, but you all ran it for multiple sessions by the sounds of it. Why didn't anyone say anything after so many games with no combat, puzzles, or traps? Hell, was there even any rules at all? Everyone should have had a talk with her about why this game didn't work out of game, instead of trying to end it in game. Though, that is just my opinion. What do you all think? Let's move on. DM and wife get us involved in their weird sex games. By Reddit user Kuma from Arg. Years ago, during an RPG dry spell, I decided to visit a gaming club, not far from where I used to live. I GM'd a couple of games there, and one time I decided to play. The guy who organized the location wanted to run a game of Mech-Tun Z, a mecha anime RPG set in the world of Gundam Seed. I decided to play a mechanic with aspirations of becoming a pilot. The rest of the team involved a gunner of the ship and a cartographer who only joined the military to pay up for college. The last member of the team was the GM's wife. She decided to play an idol in the spirit of Lin Minmay from Across. The difference is that she wasn't a pop star. She was a porn star. Half of the table was underage, and the GM and his wife were in their late 20s. It got weird fast. I thought we were going to do some exploration, find a quest, take a mission, and have some combat. No. The whole session basically was the wife's character shopping for outfits for her shoot, and then the actual shooting of a porn video. They also got a bit too descriptive, looking into each other's eyes as the wife described with all detail how she was getting plowed by 3 guys. As soon as that started, I was weirded out, so I faked a call to my cell phone and excused myself from the table, never to return to that gaming club. It was really weird. Well, it sounded like the GM and his wife's main motivation was to just roleplay some kink stuff. Perhaps they had some sort of sick thing where they get off by doing it in front of strangers, which is already kinda messed up, but the fact that there were underage people at the table makes what they did all the more disturbing. I don't blame OP for noping the hell out of there like he did, and hopefully the other people at the table took from his example and did the same. And before we get into the next one, just a reminder that liking, commenting, and subscribing really does help the channel out. Plus I like watching the little numbers go up. And so does Nipsey.
Yes, do that. I really like numbers going up.
So I hope you consider doing those things. But with that said, let's get into the following story. The New Player That Wasn't, by Reddit user The Jazzy Nerd. A couple years ago, I joined a Pokemon Tabletop Adventures campaign. It was mostly an amazingly fun game that eventually died, largely because of my work schedule. I still feel a little guilty about that. This story is about an attempt at adding a new player that thankfully didn't work out, because the person who was supposed to be the new player rubbed me the wrong way in more ways than one. We'll call this person Candy, because if I remember correctly, she looked a lot like the character of the same name from 2.5 Men, and was similarly ditzy. I show up to the host's house and get introduced to Candy, as being someone host knows from work. The first thing I remember Candy doing, as in I'd been there less than 10 minutes when this happened, was to start going off on a detailed monologue about all the men she'd slept with, and how good each one was in bed. I'm not particularly prudish. I was in the past, but I'm now happily married and have a healthy sex life, so I feel like I don't have a ton of right to shy away from sex scenes or discussions of sex. What? Sure you do. I mean, one can enjoy a good toke once in a while, but also not want to be around weed culture. But this woman was a complete stranger to me, and she was giving me more information about her sex life than I could ever want to know, even about the people I've known for years. I pulled aside the only other woman in the house, the host's wife/girlfriend. They were definitely a couple, but I never found out the specifics, and told her that I was not comfortable with the monologue currently going on in the game room. Candy did stop when asked, but I can't help but think that if she had that sort of mindset, then any character she built probably wouldn't have fit the tone of the game. It usually took a while for our sessions to start. We liked to talk amongst ourselves before getting underway. Sometimes somebody would order food, and we'd wait for it to show up before starting, in order to avoid interruption. I think we spent some of this time trying to explain what the game was and how it worked to Candy. But then, we actually pulled out our character sheets and dice, and her attitude changed significantly.
"Wait," she said, "does this game have math? I'm not good at math."
Admittedly, Pokemon the Adventure is a little bit more math intensive than D&D in regards to things like attack damage, but it's still mostly just addition. We explained this to Candy, but she's adamant. If there's math in the game, she won't play. The host decides that he'll set her up to watch a movie in the other room, while the rest of us have our session. While he's doing this, we can all hear Candy yelling about how easily she gets scared and how she won't sleep for a week if the movie has anything even slightly scary in it. I don't know what she ended up watching, but she didn't bother us during the session and actually fell asleep at some point. Some discussion was had regarding whether or not Candy was under the influence of something, and we gave host a small amount of grief over apparently doing a terrible job of explaining the game when he recruited her to join. It was overall one of the most bizarre experiences I've ever had in the realm of tabletop RPGs, and I'm still not completely sure what to think. Well, that Candy sure sounded like a character. First, she overshares about her adult life, but then when she finds out that Pokemon RPG has numbers and math in it, doesn't want to play, and the people at the game basically have to treat her like a kid that they are babysitting and sit her in front of a movie, but make sure it's not too scary. It's hard to believe people like this exist sometimes, but I actually knew someone exactly like this 10 years ago when I worked at Kroger, and I'm talking like sitcom levels. She always talked about her weekend of partying, while I would have to help her out with how many dimes and nickels were in $1. No joke. But I digress. So yeah, OP in their game was probably better off putting on VeggieTales and leaving her in the other room. Anyways, let's move on. And seeing as it's Friday, it's time to cap off the week of cringe with a D&D glory story. Killing a water elemental with a fork by Reddit user Dogman the Hero. This is a story from my first ever D&D campaign. The party is me, a variant human, bear totem barbarian, and the DM's little brother, a wizard, though I don't remember his subclass or race. It was a small group, but I know that we'd gain more members later on. This campaign centered around an ancient sealed king with 3 sons. The seal on the king could either be opened by killing his sons and taking the keys that they had, or by obtaining 7 magical pearls, 2 of which were in our possession. We had decided to hunt down at least one of the brothers and guard the quote-unquote key ourselves. Maybe not the best decision, but we were confident in our abilities. My character was a bit of a joke character. I had built it entirely on Tavern Brawler Strike, and only fought using silverware. Because of this, the DM gave me a homebrew magic item, as both characters would start with 2 of them, called the Utensil Bag of Holding. It had 15 charges, and by reaching into it, I could use one and pull out a random utensil. This will be important for later. We had just reached level 5 when we reached the youngest brother, who took the form of a giant crab made of water. No offense to any crabs. DM later revealed that we were underleveled for this encounter, so he lowered its damage output and made a few attacks, but even so, the 2 of us and the NPC who was helping us were struggling. I didn't seem to be able to hit it. He later told us it could only be harmed by magic, so I'd only be able to hit it with a utensil from the bag. And the wizard was, of course, squishy, so he was running out of HP and had been cornered by the crab. It was at this point that I had an idea, as I had just obtained the sharpshooter feat. I turned to the wizard and said, "I have an idea, but if it doesn't work, you might die. Do you want me to go for it?" To which he responded, "Will it kill it?" I said, "I think it could, but it's risky." "Will it be cool?" "If it works, yes." "Do it." I asked DM if there are any stalactites near the crab, and he tells me to roll perception as a bonus action instead of an action, because he wanted to know what I was planning. I rolled high enough to reveal one, pretty much right above the crab. I grinned at Wizard and said, "I'd like to pull a utensil out of my bag." The DM says, "Okay, you reach into the bag, Feel a metal handle in your palm and pull out a fork which glows with a faint aura. I'd like to throw the fork at the stalactite above the crab. Is that okay? DM grins, realizing what I'm planning, and says, make a ranged attack roll. I roll, and it's a natural 20. The DM describes the fork flying right at the stalactite, hitting it right at its base, and flying through to the other side. At this point, I assumed he let that happen, but would not let it fall because there was no way a fork would realistically be able to take down a stalactite. But after a short pause, he describes cracks forming around the hole, and the stalactite falling right onto the water crab, crushing it. Wizard and I start losing our minds. My silly idea actually worked. The remains of the crab formed into the shape of a watery child, who we then convinced to give us the key. Other stuff happened after that, but that was by far the highlight of that session. That barbarian is still one of my all-time favorite characters, mainly because of this event. TLDR, I rolled a nat 20 in order to crush a crab made of water with a stalactite, which I brought down using a technically magic fork. Well, I think that you can say that OP forked that crab up. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Now, I'm sure that there was some Dungeon Master leniency and use of the rule of cool, but hey, I am personally a big supporter of that rule. But that will do it for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. Until next time.